anybody watching us on the live stream, which is still a grand total of 0. So I won't worry about apologizing to people who don't see us yet.
I was gonna say, is the camera even on? Because it's up red.
It's on. I can
Okay.
tell there it's streaming on here. All right. Thank you, everybody, once again for tuning in to the Off Base Sports Podcast. As always, I am your host, Jason Benicki, and I am joined today by
Todd.
Todd. You always bring the fire on the microphone. You really make me excited. And as always, we are recording live from South Bend, Indiana. I'm not as good at that as those guys are. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. That's all right. But anyways, as always, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and the Action Network app at Degenerate Jason with no O, DEGENERATEJASN. And Todd never shares his social media, so there's no reason for me to pretend that he even has it. And you can follow us you can download the podcast on Spotify, Apple, any place you find podcasts, we're there. So, of course, we want to start out real quick today with just a quick moment of silence to go out to Kobe Bryant, his daughter, his family, and everybody involved. So, even though it's kind of tough for those of you listening, not watching, we're going to give you a quick moment of silence. And rest in peace to Kobe Bryant, his daughter, and all involved. All right. So we were planning this episode today when the absolute tragic news broke around 2:00 here on Eastern Standard Time. Kind of made us replan the show on the fly a little bit. Sports is supposed to be your escape from the real world. Needless to say, that's kind of what you look for sports to be. And then when you have to, the real world comes in to sports, it kind of throws your whole day off, kind of throws everything off that you were working on, anything you're trying to get away from, it gets a little too real, and it, hits close to home for a lot of people, whether you're a Kobe Bryant fan or not, whether you want to focus on, whether you knew him or not. I think he impacted so many people in so many ways. It's kind of hard to look at it as anything but what it was, he was obviously a huge cultural icon, a huge part of the sports lexicon, and a huge part of everyday American life. And when somebody at 41 passes so tragically, and then when they're, even worse, when you have kids involved, it just, I don't even have the right words to say. I don't know that there's a good way to talk about this. But I do, always want to take a moment, I think, when you have a moment like this, and talk. I guess for me, Kobe Bryant is one of those polarizing guys on the court, but he was my kind of guy. I always loved those go for the jugular types. I wish he could have found a way to get along with Shaq better, because if your ultimate goal is winning championships, it doesn't benefit you any to lose the greatest player of a generation on your team. So to me, that's always one of those things that you need to, got to learn to get along, I guess, would be what I would say. But there's no denying his accomplishments on the court, what he accomplished, everything he was able to do. I think anything covers who Kobe Bryant is and what he was able to do. Was his 60-point game on his last game on the court. To me, that was ultimate peak Kobe. He was obviously well past his physical prime. Injuries had sapped him of what athleticism he had. But he knew it was his last game, and he was going out shooting every shot in the building if he had to, because he wanted that iconic moment, and he wanted that second to touch base and do those kind of things. So that was Kobe to me, in a nutshell, is he was a competitor, but he wanted to be the man more than anything else. He wanted to be a guy who did it his way, who accomplished. And I found a video that was going around on Twitter earlier today that kind of covered it, kind of who Kobe was and his relationship with his daughter. And it really made you think he was, fans would come up to him and his daughter would be there with him. And they'd always say, Kobe, don't you want a son to carry on your legacy? And then she would pipe up and say, don't worry, I got this, and he really felt she did, so to him, it wasn't, I had to have a son to do this. My daughter wanted to play basketball. I was going to be all in with her. And that's what they were going to do. They were going to basketball practice when this unfortunate incident occurred. So, there are some guys who get caught in that moment of having to have a son to carry on the legacy, and Kobe didn't need that. So it's kind of funny for a guy who spent so many years trying to be the man. Like, it seems like as a father, he was the complete antithesis of that he didn't need to be the man as a father. He didn't have to have a son to carry on his legacy. He just needed children, and he had that. And they were interested in what he was interested in. And obviously he was very involved. How many times are there parents that you would wish go to practice and with their kids, and he wasn't just going to practice with his, but he was taking, teammates with them and their parents. So it's kind of everything you would hope for in that kind of scenario. You would hope to have an engaged parent. And there are other people who will speak more about Kobe. I'm not a huge Lakers fan, although we did almost have him on the Bulls one time. So that would have been awesome.
Somehow you blame Bagar Pax for screwing that one up too.
No, that's a whole nother issue for a whole nother time. Today's not that day for that conversation. That one, it was close, but it wasn't that close. But it would have been great to have him as a Bulls player. For me, when you're always competing against a guy like a Kobe, when it's your team, it kind of takes away from maybe being the biggest fan for somebody like that. I'd always take up for a guy like Luol Deng or a guy like Derrick Rose, even an injured Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler. Those were my guys. To a fault, I'm a Bulls guy.
But of everybody you just named, Kobe would have been the only one to step in and not feel that pressure of 23 in a Bulls uniform.
No, I agree. I think he would have never, not only would he have not felt that pressure, he would have embraced the challenge of winning a championship and being the guy to get over that hurdle and get over that hump. So there's definitely a case of what could have been and what was missed. That's for sure. I don't want to beat this on too long because it's not necessarily what I do best. So we're gonna transition unless you have anything you want to add to that, Todd. I think I'm gonna move away.
I mean, no, that's it. I guess the only thing I have to say is the one thing that I think he ever strived for was to be either Michael or as close to Michael as he could, and he was. I mean, he was it, and he never passed the keys on to anybody.
No, I would definitely say he was a Michael clone, and there's no way around that for sure. That was his goal. He definitely achieved and embraced it as much as he could, and after his career, the one thing you can see different from him than Michael is even in last night's accomplishment, he didn't feel the need to be competitive with it. Where Michael always still tends to be competitive about the comparisons. LeBron passing Kobe last night for all-time points scored. LeBron looked at it much more as hey, this is the next great guy. Enjoy this greatness. I don't need to compete with his greatness. And maybe that's because after years of trying to compete with Michael's greatness, he kind of realized there's no reason to compare myself to somebody from a different era and from a different time frame. Jordan picked up from Bird and Magic to carry the game forward. Mm-hmm. Me and Shaq and Allen Iverson and our group picked up from Michael Jordan to grow the game. LeBron and Steph Curry and company have picked up from me to grow the game. And, Zion and Ja Morant and whoever else will be the next generation to carry on from LeBron. And I think it really kind of brings into contrast, how silly some of our sports generational comparisons are. Not that it's going to stop me from doing it.
No,
not in a million years. But I think, it showed that, as he had moved away from the sport, that maybe he had matured away from needing to be the GOAT or that kind of comparison, that he had made that adjustment in his mentality.
Well, I will say the last interview he did, he said the one thing that still bugs him was getting 5 instead of 6.
Well, again, I kind of covered that a little earlier. If he could have been willing to be sidekick Robin to Shaq's Batman, he probably gets there.
Yeah.
I mean, they were that good, they were that dominant, and that was that group. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They were those guys all the way through.
Well, rest in peace, Kobe.
Yeah, so rest in peace to Kobe, his daughter, and all involved in that tragic accident. Again, it's just a tough day. Really changed what we were planning on doing here. Had some other topics lined up, and we may still get to them. We'll see. But we don't want to do that forever. Not my thing.
No.
But obviously, we have a very big event coming up next Sunday. We would call that a Superb Owl, so I don't have to pay any fines. So in that Superb Owl, we have a team from San Francisco and a team from Kansas City meeting off. I'm going to let Todd take the early prediction and his thoughts on it because I have a prediction and some thoughts. So I will let him run first with this one.
Very simple. The team from San Francisco by 10.
That's it? Just by 10?
By 10. I think Patrick Mahomes, well, I can say that one without having to pay anything, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wasn't sure. We couldn't say. I think Mahomes is going to run into defense, and he's not going to be able to solve it. And I honestly believe Andy Reid's going to choke this one away.
So I hear a lot of people making that comparison to the Denver-Seattle Super Bowl 5-ish, 6 years ago. And here's where I will deviate from that a whole lot. There are two, I'm going to call them 3 key differences between the Kansas City offense and the Denver offense. First off, the speed that Kansas City has, no matter how good your game plan is, no matter how good your defense is, nobody else has that speed. The Denver offense didn't have that kind of speed. The San Francisco defense doesn't have that kind of speed. It is hard to scheme speed, and they have it, and they have it in droves. 2, Patrick Mahomes loves to make plays off his back foot, off of rhythm, across his body. So being rushed, being hurried, being forced off of rhythm, not going to affect him like it did Peyton Manning. And
Okay.
3, and the absolute big backbreaker, and we saw it last weekend against Titans, is his ability to pick up chunk yard plays with his feet. So you're right. Nick Bosa can get there. D Ford can get there, although he might be a little bit offside. So hopefully that'll work for Kansas City this time.
Well,
And, he can just get away. He can escape. He can get it. So, despite all the sharp money going San Francisco, all these people saying, well, defense wins championships, I just think trying to make a comparison, and a foolish comparison in my eyes, to Denver, Seattle, between Kansas City and San Francisco is just short-sighted. I like Kansas City. I like Kansas City by 6, which more than covers the spread right now.
well, I have an answer for your speed. You can have all the speed you want when you're standing on the sidelines, and San Francisco's running the ball 46 times in the game, just like they did last week. Kansas City doesn't have the defensive front to stop that. Kansas City's defense is a front built to be in front, and they're smaller and rush guys.
Are you talking about? Because there is absolutely 0.0% chance that you can make that claim. They can't stop the run, and they need to be on the field when you just watched what they did to Tennessee, who happened to run the last 2 teams off the field. So if it was 2 weeks ago, before they played Tennessee, and you wanted to make that analogy, fine. But we just saw what they did against the best running team in the entire playoffs. End of discussion. The Titans were the best running team in the playoffs. And Kansas City met that challenge and took it on head first, and they didn't need the ball.
Well, there's a difference. Kansas City was willing to let Ryan Tannehill beat them because they didn't believe Ryan Tannehill could. Jimmy Garoppolo head this year has proven if he has to, he can carry the team.
So now you're moving on to another thing.
I'm just saying, if you wouldn't put 8 people in that box, I trust Jimmy more than I trusted Ryan to do that.
Oh,
Tell me I'm wrong.
Sorry about that text message interruption. But like I said, you guys are free to call in anytime, 574-20 274-9303. It's at the top of the video if you're watching live.
But I just
enjoying this conversation. And you can tell Todd how off his rocker he is about, first off, they didn't need 8 people to stop the running back for Tennessee. I'm drawing a blank on Derrick Henry.
Derrick Henry also is not as fast as what San Francisco has in the backfield. He's got more power, yes, but he's not as fast.
So you're already proving my point that the run game is not. If it was 10 weeks ago and we were talking Kansas City, then maybe the run game's an issue. But they've fixed their run defense. Since that, for the last
game does not cause a fix.
One
game does not cause
the
a
last
fix.
10 games of the regular season. They had the best defense in the NFL.
They played the Bears.
They also
my coach stopped myself from running the ball.
Last 10, not last game. Last 10. That's a large sample size in the NFL. You want to point to week 2 or 3 where they struggled, fine. But rest of the season, they were fine. I have full faith in Patrick Mahomes. Jimmy Garoppolo has not been throwing the ball in the playoffs. So you could say he might be able to make plays with his arms. We haven't seen it. Not when the chips are down. Not when the lights shine the brightest. So I want to see if when the lights come out, that star comes out that night, because he hasn't proven it yet. Okay. Everybody wants to write a check that he's somebody he's not.
Down 24 and down 10. I like San Francisco if that's how they're going to start that game off again.
Again, you're making my point on how dynamic that offense is. This is not Denver circa 2013. This is not.
Again, I think
any analogy they want to pull out of, it's not the greatest show on turf. The problem is they don't need time. They don't need rhythm. They make plays off schedule, off play. Correct. It's the same problem that teams had for years with Ben Rothlisberger and the Pittsburgh Steelers, is that they can make plays at any time from any place and off schedule, off rhythm, extend the play forever to keep it going.
Well, I'm just going to put it this way. I trust Shanahan more than I trust Andy Reid.
I think Andy Reid's season is an overblown thing. This is his 2nd Super Bowl now. I think he knows what to expect. I've seen what Mike Shanahan does, or not. Well,
yeah, Mike, because that's who it is. Don't be all consistent. It's Mike Shanahan up top helping as much as he possibly humanly can.
I remember a 24-3 Super Bowl with Shanahan calling plays and what happened there. So I think if I have to worry about who knows how to manage clock and manage a running game at the end of a Super Bowl, I think I know who to trust more. And that's saying a lot with Andy Reid's on the other side having timeouts. But
I agree. I can't argue that point, but as I said, I like San Francisco. I think it's going to be at least 10.
All right. Well, if any of you guys have anything you want to add to that, it's 574-274-9303. Feel free, call in. You can interrupt us. We're more than okay with taking a call and stopping the action for anybody who's got something they want to add to the show.
And so if you're called, I'm willing to take bets on that one too.
We don't have a bag of bets yet. We need something similar to that. If any of you watch Punch Drunk Sports or listen to Punch Drunk Sports, you know what the bag of bets is. We're open for our suggestion because I can't steal their idea, but I would like to imitate it if we are going to do bets, where it's some random thing you have to do. It's not money, but it's ridiculous things that you have to do. Record them, post them online. If you lose, I like that idea much better than money. Humiliation is the best. Absolutely.
Speaking of humiliation, did you see on the I see it on YouTube, there's a fantasy football league. This guy won 2 games all year. His friends wrapped his car into pink with all their faces on it and unicorns and rainbows, and he had to drive the car for a full year.
Love it. Kind of disappointed I didn't think of that. Fantasy football has all kinds of great humiliation things like that, whether they're beer miles, beer challenges, things of that nature that kind of get people pushing the envelope and really pushing that embarrassment threshold. Physical pain, physical embarrassment. I'm all about it. I've said for years we need something like that in our own fantasy league to keep people honest instead of bailing once their teams are garbage. But yeah, love that. As long as we're in the world of football,
okay.
Somebody who saved us from having to deal with 8 Patriot Super Bowls, Eli Manning announced his retirement Friday. Phillip Rivers has packed up his football team worth of family, leased out one of those air buses to move from San Diego back to Florida so he could be closer to family. And of course, you can't talk those two without talking Ben Rothlisberger. So
recovering from Tommy John.
Right. And having a Grizzly Adams beard while he does so. So I think that one gets me, always thinking, everybody tries to compare these three guys and where they rank. And I'm biased here. I'm going to put the man with 2 Super Bowls, wins a 3rd Super Bowl appearance, and some of the greatest individual performances of the group at number 1, and easily the highest winning percentage, both regular season and postseason. Ben Roethlisberger, to me, is the number 1 quarterback of the group.
I'm glad you clarified that a little bit, because when you said just 2 Super Bowls, I was going to say, you talk about Eli?
I said 2 Super Bowl wins and a 3rd appearance. I was getting there. Got to let me finish my thought. Once I finish my thought, then you can figure out where I was going. So obviously, like I said, Eli did us all a favor by keeping the Patriots from having 8 Super Bowls. Although, if they win some of those, butterfly effect, you never know what happens if they complete the 19-0 season. Maybe Brady and Belichick break up sooner and see if they can accomplish without each other. Who knows what happens if they accomplish that milestone? But Eli, in true Eli fashion, ends his career 113-113. So absolutely mediocre. He won 2 Super Bowls. Granted, some of those losses were piled up at the very end when his GM and coach situation just turned into absolute Cleveland Brown level of hot garbage there in New York. I mean,
sorry, New York.
It's they know what happened. They saw it. They're not gonna argue with me, I don't think. I mean, if you're out there and want to make a case, then you can. So I would put Eli.
I was more of the salt in the wound type thing. And then they didn't know. They know, but you didn't have to kind of.
So I would put Eli number 2, because you get this narrative around Phillip Rivers, and he's had some great regular seasons, and then you get this narrative that he never had support, forgetting that he had LaDainian Tomlinson, Melvin Gordon, Antonio Gates essentially his entire career,
Keenan
Allen. What's the wide receiver that left San Diego and went to Tampa Bay years ago?
Williams? Oh no. Whoa.
I can't think of it. But I mean, he's always had a number 1 wide receiver. He's always had a top, one of the top 3 tight ends of the league. He's always had a top tier running back. He's always had a good offensive line. He's always had a good second wide receiver too to take some pressure. So to me, there were 4 years in a row where the San Diego had like the number 2 ranked defense. Granted, that's because Sean Merriman was on steroids at the time, but that doesn't help you tackle. That doesn't help you read a play.
Do you have to use the word allegedly?
No, he failed a test. I don't have to use the word allegedly when he fails.
Well, I didn't just did the time frame. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, okay, if I'm going to say all 4 years or so, yeah, I would have to say allegedly on steroids the whole time. Fair enough. Good point. Thank you. And I like Sean Merriman, so it's not like a dig. The amount of people in steroids in professional sports to this day with advanced testing is still much higher than any of us think. So there's nothing that we really need to get off track with that. But I do think that he gets oversold. Vincent Jackson was the wide receiver.
Oh, okay.
My buddy Devin must be watching because he just texted in and let me know. Thank you, Devin. If you're watching, feel free to call in. Again, we will take phone calls. But Vincent Jackson, yes, I forgot about that. So, again, he's had the support for years. He's had the weapons. He had the tools. I don't like the narrative that gets spun because he wasn't able to get over the cream of the crop, that he didn't accomplish it. Because realistically, you have what? This is the 2nd year in going back to 2001 that we don't have Brady, Manning, or Roethlisberger in the Super Bowl for the AFC. You
had that Flacco guy.
You had one Joe Flacco one, and you had this one now with Mahomes. Yeah. So
yours is Big Ben, Eli
and Rivers.
Well, for a pretty boring segment. I'm kind of in the same, but I'm going to throw a little curveball at you because I'm not going to make the same arguments you just made. Hall of Famers, how many you got of them? Out of those 3?
I could make a case for all 3. Because if you look at...
You're voting. Do you vote all 3 in? Not a case. Is all 3 in?
Well, you've got one who's got Hall of Fame numbers, 2 Super Bowl wins, and a 3rd Super Bowl appearance. No quarterback with that kind of resume hasn't got in, so Ben's in. Eli's got 2 Super Bowls, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, less polished regular season numbers, But again, Hall of Fame voters do tend to eat up Super Bowl wins, Super Bowl MVPs. I wouldn't put him in, but he gets in my opinion. Phillip Rivers also gets in. He's got the best regular season numbers of all three, which does help. Although I wonder how that'll age out over the next 10 years with passing numbers constantly inflating. Maybe that holds him back if he doesn't have some late career postseason success. But that's it. I could, like I said, I could make a case for all three. If I was voting, I would probably say, yeah, all three get in, because to me, Hall of Fames are interesting things, and to me, you're telling the history of the sport, and it's hard to tell the history of the 2000s, 2010 football without all three of those guys. They all three played some pivotal role in the story of the game. They all accomplished something meaningful. They all, again, Rivers is the one that I would say is borderline in my opinion at this point.
I only have one. I have Big Ben. That's the only one. The other two, if there was a Hall of Fame of being very good, you are more than welcome in, but you two are not Hall of Famers. Eli Manning has the exact same case. So outside of the name, if you take the names out, I can give you another quarterback, exact same kind of information that is not in.
So you're making the one guy who didn't vote for Derek Jeter case for the Hall of Fame? Is that what you're saying?
I'm talking about Plunkett of the Raiders. He's not in. He has you can take the names off of it, and you can put it out there. The passing numbers are less, but he has the same 500 record. He's got 2 Super Bowls. He's got Eli's case. Eli has more yards, but it's a different era, and it was a lot more passing. Outside of that, I don't see him in. And sorry, Phillip Rivers, what did you do outside of get big numbers in games that didn't matter? You had, 2 seasons, 3 seasons where your teams were pushing and the games mattered. The rest of them, 6-10, 7-9, 8-8. You were out of the playoffs, and then you started racking up numbers.
No, I mean, like I said, if it's me, for sure, Rivers is the borderline one of the group. I think that's the easiest case to make for an out. I think Plunkett didn't have 2 Super Bowl MVPs, though, did he?
I didn't say if he has 2 Super Bowls. Yeah, I think he has 1 MVP, 1 non, but he does have the same 500 record.
Yeah.
And they've kept him out.
Right. And unfortunately, but though voters will look at the name as well. Also, very different playing in that New York spotlight. They will look at the end of his career and say, yeah, he ended up with a 500 record, but some of that was not outside of his control as a quarterback. I mean, when you played behind some of those offensive lines he did these last few years, you couldn't ask anybody, even Russell Wilson, to accomplish anything behind that group.
Question: if he didn't have the last name Manning to begin with, all the average numbers he had in the regular season would that have kept him as a job? I mean, if you look at the numbers, they're not the greatest numbers. I mean,
see Trubisky, Mitchell.
Well,
when he starts for the Bears again next year,
I still have hope. Tom Brady in a Bears uniform. Until he signs somewhere else, I'm crossing everything I got and hoping.
Here is the only veteran quarterback you guys are bringing in next year besides Chase Daniels. Smith, Alex.
I like it better than Mitch, Trubisky.
But I see Ryan Pace making sure that there's nobody in the way of Mitch Trubisky starting for the Bears next year. Anytime you're a first-round pick, you get a longer leash from your GM. So he's, I see Eli. His name was important, but it wasn't the whole story. It's why he went number 1 overall. Because really, if you look at the draft comparisons for all 3 of those quarterbacks going into 4, they were very similar guys. The problem is, A, teams didn't sell the farm back then to get franchise quarterbacks, thankfully. And 2, there were only 3 teams in the top half of the draft that needed quarterbacks. New York, San Diego, and Pittsburgh. And it was the only time Pittsburgh drafted that high for another decade plus, other than till this year, till they traded up to go up there.
I thought there was a knock on Rivers on that throwing motion.
Well, there was, but but again, on Eli, it was decision making. There was some turnover issues with Ben. It was he played against lesser competition. So did he deserve, coming out of the MAC, were his numbers inflated? Did he deserve to be in here? Or was it all a byproduct of lesser competition? So they, at the end of the day, all kind of had a knock against them. So that's why they kind of all graded out the same, but they were clearly three best quarterbacks in that class. Turned out to be 3 of the best quarterbacks for another decade.
Yeah.
In all fairness. there was clearly never a class again like that where you had, Rivers and Smith actually both turned out to be productive football players in different ways and different means.
Rivers and
Smith and Rogers.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay. I was like, wait a minute, I wasn't sure where you were going. So,
yep. So you'll have those moments. But like I said, other than that, there aren't too many draft classes where you can find multiple quarterbacks. Again, to remind Bears fans, Mahomes and Watson.
he's liking the salt in the wound today.
Somewhat, yeah. I don't have to do it, but I'd like to do it. It's who I am.
But again, I said I still only have one of them as a Hall of Fame. I don't think if take name Manning away that he gets in, and I don't think Phillip Rivers had it. I mean, yeah, you look at the numbers, but the numbers didn't lead to anything. I mean, didn't even lead to many playoff wins, to be honest.
No, I mean, he really only won those 2 years where he won his 2 Super Bowls, and that beyond that, it was pretty, mediocre.
Rivers haven't won any Super Bowls.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Eli.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, Rivers is a little less than 500, but right around 500 in the playoffs. Same as Eli. Ben, little above it, but still not too far.
And I will say, Rivers' chances go down if Tom Brady goes there and they go to the Super Bowl next year.
I don't see him going to San Diego because that's as close as I'm going to get to calling him the LA Chargers. So I'm just going to start calling them San Diego because LA doesn't accept them either. They're just kind of there, waiting to go somewhere else. If there wasn't $1.5 billion stadium, I think they'd already be gone. But they need to pay for that stadium with 16 games a year instead of just 8. Any of you listening want to join in? Tell us what you think. Eli, Ben, and Phillip. You think if 1, 2, or 3, or none Hall of Famers, you can give us a call. Join the conversation. 574-274-9303. It's at the very top of the video post as well. Always willing to have you call in. Feel free to interrupt. I will answer a phone call at any time. Keep the phone in my hand, mainly because it's where all my notes are for the show. I need to rearrange the area we record in, and maybe I'll put the whiteboard on the other side of the video camera, and then I can just have it up there and don't have to look down at my phone so much. But
that would help a little bit so I know where we're going sometimes.
I could give you the road map, and you still couldn't find where we're going. Does somebody forget our trip to Cooperstown one year?
No, I remember that. The only road on the fucking map, and I couldn't find it.
I give him a map. I say, hey, we're looking for this road in this quadrant. Let's say B6 per chance. It is the only other road in the entire quadrant. Only road besides the one we're on. Nope, can't find it. Nowhere. So I have to pull off to the side of the road, and I find it, and I'm like, genius, you're never navigating a trip for me again.
By the way, thanks for dating us for saying we had to actually use a map.
Hey, anybody watching this can tell I'm old. I've got a lot of gray hair. You have almost no hair. They see it. They get it. We're both in the middle age era of our lives. Okay, no ifs, ands, or buts.
You didn't have to confirm it by saying we had the physical map in our hands.
No, I can't tell the story of you getting us lost when there's one road in the entire quadrant and having to circle back to it. Hey, sports. I could already tell who the caller is. Devin, what's up, man? Hang on a second. It's not quite coming through. Let me see if I can tune it up a little bit so we can hear you. Can you hear us now? Oh, that's why. It's not coming into the Roadcaster. All right, how you doing, buddy?
Well, how about yourself?
Doing good, man. I ain't talked to you in a while. How's everything been going?
All's well down in sunny Florida.
Yeah, I bet. It's not 20 degree and icy Indiana, that's for sure.
Indeed. I fled and jumped ships. I happen to be listening in on the conversation you were having regarding handicapping Hall of Fame odds. And here's a thought to posit. Perhaps Phillip Rivers is the victim of bad timing. It's very possible, given comparable numbers, that he'd have greater consideration, albeit that there were not so many comparable quarterbacks that at least have more metal, so to speak. I mean, the immediate comparables would be Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, but they're both sitting on an MVP award, and they've both been in the Super Bowl with similar numbers. And of course, that leaves them kind of in a strange position because you have Russell Wilson, who has won a Super Bowl, has been the two, and has flat out superior numbers compared to him. On the other end of that, you've got Eli, who, like you said, over the last few years has really suffered at the hands of management as opposed to his own abilities. That creates an interesting question nonetheless when you compare them because, I mean, are there truly apples to apples at that point? It's hard to say. Let's stick with Rivers just for a second. Rivers probably gets in time. He surely won't be in the first couple of years. There are just too many people that are going to retire ahead of him that will be considered priority. Of that list, surely Ben Rothlisberger. And I would argue in time Eli gets in as well, but definitely not first ballot. I mean, there are still players on the kind of on the wait, if you will, that will merit quicker consideration, especially some of the vets that have been waiting a while. But I actually will make a play here and say that all three will get in, but they'll just get in varying time frames. I mean, because we have to consider that Hall of Fame eligibility is, of course, contingent on player retirement, right? Or in the forbiddable case, demise. So in that light, that does dictate eligibility and what the pool looks like. So in that case, if Eli gets considered in what we would consider a flat period, where there's just no one that really stands out, that enhances Eli's candidacy, despite having the 2 Super Bowl appearances and otherwise a slightly above average career. On the other hand, would that do the same thing for Phillip Rivers if Eli is in the same flat period? Hopefully, given Eli's window of retirement, he'll be able to see a window either right before Roethlisberger, Rodgers, and company, or immediately following. That will still garner consideration. But all things considered, yeah, I'd make the play and say that all three would give some sort of induction. And once again, that's just me just observing writer and voter eligible voter habits. If it were my personal take, I think I can make a play for 2. And unfortunately, that leaves Eli out, actually.
No, I think that's a very valid point. And I hadn't even thought about that in terms of who retires when, because, obviously you're looking at a pretty narrow time frame here where you're going to have Drew Brees retiring. Tom Brady has to retire eventually. Like you said, Ben,
at least allege.
Ben, Phillip, Eli, Aaron Rodgers has already said he's towards the back end of his career. So I do think you run into a stacking problem like you've run into kind of with wide receivers recently.
Oh, for sure.
And even running backs to an extent have had to be stacked up and wait some time. Not that I'm saying, Hines Ward is a victim of being stacked up at wide receiver or anything, but if any Hall of Fame voters are listening anywhere, anytime they have to change an entire rule of the game because a wide receiver goes out and blocks so bad that he breaks a linebacker's jaw, that guy's a Hall of Famer in my book. I'm just saying. Bias aside, Hall of Fame is about telling the history of the game, and if you don't have the guy in there who was a legitimately 1,000-catch receiver for a team that didn't throw a lot for most of his career, so he didn't get the advantage of inflated pass totals that some guys got. And again, they had to change the way the game is played because of him. I think that to me is a Hall of Famer. So I like the idea, thinking about it in terms of stacking, because that could put Eli and Phillip, a little farther out. Although it depends how many of Phillip's kids can vote by the time he gets there. Maybe he just gets in on his whole family vote first ballot.
The book is in from Vegas. It's 5-1 that 4 of them will be voting eligible at that point.
So I have a question then, because out of the last 2-3 years, if you look at the quarterbacks that played, so we know at least 5, maybe 6 are going to go into the Hall of Fame. You got Breeze, you got Brady, you've got Ben, you've got Rodgers. Wilson, and the way it's looking, Mahomes. So you don't even have the other ones in the top 6. How far down the ladder of mediocrity are you going to be in your own time? Are we still going to allow people into the Hall of Fame? I mean, you can't even you're not even in the top 5 there in your own period. Sure.
Well, I think the counter question there is what we consider to be their era. So are we insinuating that it has to be done in the most productive 8-9 years of a player's career, or some variation of that, or is that the entire body of work? Because in that case, then player overlap is inevitable. And that's, in a way, unfair to the inductee, or at least the person for consideration to some extent. Not saying it's completely unfair because it's unavoidable. However, it does raise additional questions, right? Mm-hmm. So if we were to critique Eli since 2012, there's no question. I think everyone would say, no, thanks for playing. Sucks what happened to you, but it is what it is. But if you were to rate him, to that point, the guy's a serious case. Right. He literally is the ironic giant killer while wearing a Giants uniform. So we used to have a running joke saying every time Tom Coughlin's job is up, he wins a Super Bowl and keeps it. So,
very true.
From that perspective, if you were to rate his prime, and I say that loosely, then Eli does have a serious case. Because, I would argue that his prime was from 2007 to roughly the end of 2014. And then after that, it just went dead south really quick.
So let me ask this. At what point did you have Tom Brady in as a Hall of Famer? After which Super Bowl?
Oh, goodness. I don't think it was any surprise after the second win. The guy was on a trajectory. The model was working. It was hard to see that train stopping anytime soon. And then, frankly, let's be fair. Because the playoffs are structured how they are, right? One conference plays the other. We see that as a theme in major sports, right? There was no one coming out of the NFC stopping that train at the time, the early run. We've seen some juggernauts develop, but ultimately the system adapts well enough and the players then begin to play. So we see a case here, and it's very, I would liken it to the San Antonio Spurs model that they've used in the last generation, where you create this baseline model that's so efficient that you can plug people in, and then they begin to shine because they excel at executing the model, right? Mm-hmm. And so you look at that and you say, well, Tom won the last couple, what seemed to be fumes and right. a couple bad tires. He barely drove that car into the gas station, to get it filled up. Somehow he pulls it off because ultimately players still have to play. Even if the model is flawless, I would say flawless to some, at that point it was really good. But unfortunately, age is also caught up. Injuries catch up to you. The fact that a nearly 40-year-old Tom Brady could win 2 Super Bowls at that point. The performance I think of really is John Elway at the end of his career winning back-to-back Super Bowls. Just the display of experience, knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. And remember, football is determined by 1 point. You win by 1, you win it all. So right. The idea that he knew how to get just enough speaks volumes about the model and speaks volumes about how he excelled within that model. So for me, I'd say after the second Super Bowl, you could just kind of see the writing on the wall. People are starting to tense up a little bit, thinking this thing ain't going to stop anytime soon. And of course, after the first Super Bowl win, people are like, oh, it's so great that they won. This is wonderful. For the season, I'm a fan. They win the second one, all of a sudden the Darth Vader effect takes place. And now you start to have more naysayers than fans. The third one, people are just tired of you, right. And they want a new underdog to root for. Now add 4 and 5 to that, I think at this point we're at 6, right?
Yeah, he got 6.
So they're 6 and 3. 6 and 3.
That is insane.
Right.
Arguably.
No, he's 6 and 2.
No.
That's silly.
They lost twice to the Giants, once to the Eagles.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in all fairness, I was sick of the Patriots long before because they don't even make that first Super Bowl if Tom Brady doesn't get hurt in the AFC Championship game against the Steelers and Drew Brees comes in and starts throwing darts. Or Drew Bledsoe. Because Tom Brady, to me, really was along for the ride for the first 3 Super Bowls.
Sure.
You just said the Patriots lost to the Eagles?
Yeah. Remember Philly special?
Okay,
Big Richard, Nick Foles.
I was thinking back to the other one with Donovan. That's what I was thinking back to that one where Andy Reid was there. I was going to use that again against you as Andy Reid choking away a Super Bowl.
Hey, Donovan McNabb's not his quarterback thrown up in the huddle this time. I think we're all right.
I do have a quick question about that. I heard you taking kind of gauging Andy Reid's odds there. I was wondering what Vegas would say about the likelihood of him pounding a cheesesteak at halftime during the game.
I think I looked. It was plus 1250.
Ooh, I'll take a chance on that. I'll get my money back.
I'm just saying, if they were anywhere than Miami, it might be a little higher. But since they're in Miami,
Sure, yeah.
now if you ask, odds of having a Cuban, whole different.
Oh, sure. Hey, there's a couple good Philly cheesesteak spots down there. Surprisingly, everyone comes to the tax haven,
Yeah.
But but for sure, I think you really illuminated a serious conversation that's going to be had, and it will have to be had because we often point towards the trophies, right, as a basis. Really, I hate to admit it, as a baseline, and specifically in football, as what determines greatness. Because frankly, at that point, it truly is any given Sunday, right? And what we at least name or dub underdogs can always, perform their best and have stellar standout performances. And next thing you know, you've got yourself a Jimmy Garoppolo who was groomed to be great. Ends up signing a fat contract out west, and now is proving how great he's been all along.
I would say I don't know if we know how great he is yet. I'd want to. Yeah. I'm putting him in that Tannehill category. You have to throw the ball more than 15 times in a playoff game for me to say you're great.
You mean 7 doesn't work for you?
I mean, it's don't get me wrong. That first Steelers playoff run with Ben Rothlisberger in 2004, he wasn't averaging much more than a dozen pass attempts either.
That guy was playing like Y.A. Tittle out there.
I mean, he wouldn't shovel passes.
Field punts and shuttle.
He'd throw the ball 50 yards when he got a chance. They just didn't give him that many chances.
Let's say there were 7 chances a game.
It's like, no, we got Jerome Bettis here. Just keep handing him the ball. It's fine.
Oh, absolutely.
Just keep doing that. Good.
So that leads to another potential question. Does LaDainian Tomlinson's performance in San Diego during his days there significantly impact Phillip Rivers' his candidacy for the Hall of Fame? Because let's be honest, you usually have 2 primary choices considering offense. You either throw it or you hand it off. So does that affect, the overall candidacy? Because choices were made there. LT obviously had a wonderful run in San Diego. However, those are opportunities that could have been in the air. So do we consider that?
I think you have to kind of, under normal circumstances, you would say, it does. But LaDainian Tomlinson was very much like Le'Veon Bell in his peak with the Steelers, where he was so multidimensional that he actually helped his young quarterback by giving him that dump-off safety valve. You're talking about a guy who set single-season records for touchdowns, not just by running them in, but by having, almost, 10-ish passing touchdowns a year, receiving touchdowns a year as well. So, kind of goes back to my point earlier. He always had a number 1 type receiver, a top of 3 tight end, a number 2 receiver, and a fairly good pass catching running back, that made his life a lot easier in San Diego. I think people have painted a narrative of there were a few years where Phillip Rivers had maybe a less than ideal set of weapons, but it was very few for his career. And he definitely hasn't.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Hasn't, made as many. I guess the thing for me is when you go to put together those video montages for their candidacy, you're going to have 50, 100 iconic plays of Ben Roethlisberger making escape, making late game play, wins. You're going to see great plays in playoffs. You're going to see, of course, the Santonio Holmes throw in the Super Bowl.
Of course, yeah.
You've got those iconic plays. Eli has those iconic plays. I don't feel like Phillip Rivers. And like I said, I think at the end of the day, he gets in. I too. But he just doesn't have that same level of iconic play to even put on the highlight reel where you have those moments where you can say, see, here's, stealing from the NCAA basketball tournament, he doesn't have that one shining moment, let alone a reel of one shining moments.
You mean the one when Kenny Long and Michael Donner are singing "This Is It" in the background?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's entertain that. So to be iconic, you have to be put in opportunities and situations to be iconic. And of course, one very glaring bugaboo is that Phillip Rivers has been, albeit underwhelming, in his one playoff performance, one maybe 2.
No,
I thought it was he only made the playoffs a couple of years. So either 2 or 3. I thought.
Oh. Right, and he's only made it to the divisional, right? Like it hasn't been anything crazy.
I thought he made one AFC championship game.
Maybe one. So I'm going to take a pot shot and say it was while Schottenheimer was there in North Turner. And so that means we're going back a few years.
Yeah, so he's 4-4 in the playoffs, so he's been there 4 times, which again,
Mercy.
I think you have to say is an indictment on him, because A, that's kind of the standard by which quarterbacks are judged, And again, when you look at his early career stretch there, when he had Jackson and Gates and LaDainian Tomlinson, and that defense was top 2, top 3 every year. You know, it wasn't like they were a one-dimensional team by any stretch of the imagination. If you're not making the playoffs with that setup.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were definitely multidimensional, and there were a couple years there where it seemed like they were completely unbeatable, even considering New England. However, we also have to accept the fact that San Diego is one of the most poorly managed teams in all sports. Or now, I guess, LA Chargers, right?
I call them San Diego. I'm sticking with it till they have a new home. Because LA is not their permanent home. It can't be. They're just not embraced in that city. But yeah,
it seems kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess the problem is when you're in the NFL, there's always a standard by which the worst managed sports team in history of all sports is in your league. So, you know, everybody else kind of gets bumped up a level or two from that. And I do think that kind of goes against San Diego.
Wasn't Marty Schottenheimer fired after a 14-win season?
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
You know,
he took the brunt for Phillip Rivers collapsing.
Lovie Smith was fired after a playoff appearance, or no, 11-5 season. Something like
we
that.
didn't make the
playoffs.
We didn't, but he 11-5. So I mean,
but I think at that point that was enough years for Marty where they're like, okay, you're putting up amazing regular season wins, and we're winning out in the playoffs again. I think it got to be okay. We're going to try and make a change and move forward. You know, and of course, then they went backwards.
8-8 every year. We can live with 8-8 every year.
Oh, for sure. I mean, so let me ask you this: who's going to want to leave their comfortable coaching situation and go to, at the time, San Diego, following a 14-win campaign with an early exit? I mean, that just seems like a tall order. To me, that will be a red flag thing that there's something here at the top that's going wrong.
It did. But there's guys with big enough egos saying, I can fix it.
Well, except didn't they end up with Norv Turner?
I mean, who is great if he's given an assignment, but being an HC, he's just overwhelmed.
Yeah, not his gig by far.
No.
That was not a...
I mean, heck, even Saban in Miami looks better than that.
Ooh, I don't know. Nick Saban in Miami is one of my favorite what-ifs because he was his own worst enemy. If we want to talk about a football... People want to put him in that football deity era now, and it's like he's the guy who chose Dante Culpepper over Drew Brees.
Saban lied, you know.
Like,
I'm not leaving. Bye.
You know, beyond the even, you know, not being truthful when he was leaving, I don't have a problem with that. But like to try and spin it like, well, they didn't set him up for success. He chose his quarterback, and he chose poorly.
Yeah,
Didn't he blame the medical staff too for not clearing that arm?
So the medical staff said that Dante Culpepper had a better chance of regaining pre-injury performance levels than Drew Brees because of the shoulder injury, because at the time people hadn't bounced back from the shoulder injury. And they're right. Dante Culpepper probably was closer to pre-injury because the year before the injury, even he had dipped down in his performance because he didn't have Chris Carter and Randy Moss anymore. Kind of seen who he was without the two best wide receivers, you know. It's very dynamic twosome. And they're right. Drew Brees did not regain pre-injury form when he got back from surgery. He was better than he ever was.
He left it.
Yeah. So technically, the medical staff did not miss there.
Yeah, no, they're right. He said, "No, you're not going to be good again." He said, "Hold my beer," and the rest is 5,000 plus season passing history.
So yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot of great what ifs in sports, but.
Sure.
You know, yeah. Does Ben Rothlisberger get the benefit of probably playing for through what we would call the history of sports, probably the best organization throughout the history of sports?
Oh, absolutely.
And easily the second best organization in football through the entire period of his career, because you're not. I mean, what New England accomplished in the last 20 years is hard to overlook, whether you like them or not, whether you think they cheated a bunch and they did or not. You know that their stability breeds success, and it's where I laugh hilariously at those folks who live in the mistake by the lake. You know, they get Haslam, who was a minority owner of the Steelers, and then he comes there, and every other year he's firing his GM, and every year he's firing his coach. It's like, didn't you learn anything while you were co-owner with the Rooneys. I mean, granted, he owned a small percentage, but you'd still think you'd absorb a little of that. Like, maybe if I don't fire my coach every year, my players might get to know the system and perform better.
Well,
I mean, granted, they hired Freddie Kitchens, and that was terrible.
I was going to say, he also looked at the caliber that he's hiring to begin with. He's not hiring grade A stock either.
But, very true.
But was Mike Tomlin wasn't Mike Tomlin when the Steelers hired him either.
Oh, he was known as Omar Epps.
I mean, granted, but retroactively, we need to give Mike Tomlin a couple of Coach of the Year awards for the last few years.
Oh, I agree.
Like, he's done a lot with Ben Rothlisberger gets in the Hall of Fame just because dealing with Antonio Brown for, 4 years?
I think Mike Tomlin gets in the Hall of Fame for that, too. Jesus.
And to be fair, Tomlin's built up a good enough resume to be considered at this point.
You'd be very hard to keep him out. And, I mean, again, you're talking, what, a 13-year stretch now with no losing seasons. I mean, it's unrivaled.
Pretty impressive.
Particularly for a first-time head coach. You know, you get all those cliches from these teams. Well, we need a veteran coach and we need somebody with experience. No, you need to interview better and hire the right guy. I think that's where the Rooney family has excelled. Is everybody expected them to go with Ken Wisenhunt or Dick LeBeau when they brought in Tomlin for the interview, and they thought, oh, they're just satisfying the Rooney role. And who knows? Maybe that was the intent. But once they had that interview, they're like,
he's our guy.
Nobody else is getting a chance to interview this guy. He's our guy. He's going to be that guy. But
something clicked,
also sometimes I think too many times, and it's what you've seen in Cleveland is impatience with coaches.
Absolutely.
And I think we also need to give Marvin Lewis a Coach of the Year award retroactively.
Oh man,
because what's happening in Cincinnati now is like, holy, how did you keep that shit together? That would have been impossible any otherwise.
I absolutely agree. And it's kind of funny. Actually, you hit on a very interesting subject. So I was just thinking in my mind as we were discussing candidacy and models. Great models create, of course, great performances, right? But most importantly, they usually create consistency per player at a higher rate than atypical or asymmetrical models, which means that players given more opportunities to be great, more statistically speaking, will be great, right? Players who are given an opportunity to be good or to perform, more often than not, will figure it out how to perform, will be coached into how to achieve, good performance and be given more opportunities for consideration. So if you think about the major sports Hall of Fames, they're stacked with players from usually a cloister of organizations. And so when we were talking about the three quarterbacks in particular, that I kind of threw a mental, I guess, I use this analogy a lot in the theater of my mind, or a metaphor, sorry, how this would play out if given an opportunity to play in a similar model. So would Phillip Rivers achieve similar numbers in Pittsburgh, right? Would, for that matter, Eli Manning have achieved similar numbers? Because ultimately the goal is to win a championship. If you do that throwing for 2,500 yards, if you do that throwing for 5,000, that's on you. At the end of the day, no one cares as long as you hoist the trophy. So knowing the bias towards Super Bowl trophies, had Phillip won 2 Super Bowls but not passed for as many yards in Pittsburgh, would he have achieved more significant consideration in the long run? I mean, I think the answer is inherently yes, simply by virtue of having 2 trophies. Despite maybe being above average at best, but we will never know that because it's a huge hypothetical.
Well, see, I would disagree. If he wasn't the reason for the Super Bowls, then I still think the answer would be no. Trent Dilfer's got a Super Bowl, and nobody's talking about him ever for Hall of Fame.
I think football is uniquely weird in that. You're right. They do look at Super Bowl wins as a qualifier for greatness and the Hall of Fame, despite the fact that it's the team sport right there, I would say, with hockey. Although,
absolutely,
where one individual has maybe the least amount of impact on winning, unless you're a goaltender.
Yeah,
I mean, because even Wayne Gretzky could only do so much. Mario Lemieux, my guy, who I truly believe is the greatest hockey player of all time, given that in his prime, other than when he came back to save Pittsburgh in hockey, averaged 2 points a game, which even Wayne Gretzky didn't do. And was robbed of significant years due to cancer and back injuries. but even they can only do so much on the ice. But goalie being the one exception, if you're a Patrick Waugh or a Martin Brodeur, then obviously you can carry teams to finals as Martin Brodeur did and Patrick Waugh did. But, football's kind of similar. A great quarterback can be a great quarterback, and without the right pieces can't get anywhere. All you have to look at is, 1998 Minnesota with Randall Cunningham.
Yeah.
Who went into camp as a punter, competing for the punter position, and ended up winning the quarterback position due to injuries. But 2, you gave him some of those most dynamic weapons football's ever seen.
And won 15 games in the regular season.
15-1, a chip shot field goal away from, with a kicker who hadn't missed a field goal in 2 years, away from going to a Super Bowl.
Places. Yeah.
So, it's weird, what that would have done for Randall Cunningham, who I always feel like deserved to be closer to the Hall of Fame than he got, because I think he got pushed out of Philadelphia strictly because they just weren't that good as a team during that stretch. And they tried to blame him, even though he did more than almost any quarterback at the time could do, but you just can't carry a team as one person in football. If your defense is bad, no matter what you do on offense, it's not enough. If you're a great quarterback and you have no wide receivers, no offensive line, you're not doing anything. So I think the standard of using Super Bowl trophies is fundamentally flawed, yet it is what they use, particularly for quarterbacks. As they say, you get too much credit and too much blame. And I think Eli and Phillip kind of exemplified both the extremes of that, whereas Ben has probably not had, too much blame. But he's had, for whatever reason, all us Steeler fans like to blame our offensive coordinators and our bad offensive line, because he had some pretty bad offensive lines in there for a stretch, too, in the middle of his career.
Well, but Todd Haley's not a great offensive coordinator either.
Hey, I mean...
No, he is not.
I'm not going to make your argument. I don't think Randy Fichtner could draw up a play if his life depended on it. But...
I'm going to ask you, because we keep going Super Bowls for the Hall of Fame. Joe Flacco.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah.
But he has the stretch where he played them, 4 games out of his mind. And he has the Super Bowl MVP. He has the Super Bowl.
But it's one. Typically for a quarterback, you at least have to get to 2 before... It's 2 get you into discussion. 3... Okay. There are very few quarterbacks with multiple wins and 3 appearances who haven't gotten in, and 3 wins pretty much locks you into the Hall of Fame as a quarterback. If you've got 3 Super Bowls, you're in. I
know that's where Devin messed up my analogy earlier when I asked him when he thought Tom Brady, because I was waiting for him to say 3, because the first 2 he was there, but there wasn't his led team. He was led by defense, running, and the 2-yard pass.
No, I mean, I would easily say in Tom Brady, again, it kind of proves the point of how fluky winning playoff games is, when some of those, realistically, they should be right at 500 in the Super Bowl. Their plus minus is abysmally low. They have not blown out. They've not won a touchdown by more than 7 points.
Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Yeah, there you go.
Super Bowl. Not that I have any worries with our download numbers of anybody worrying about our trademark infringement at all. So please share this with people far and wide. Get people to download it. Granted, our last one we did live like this, we got over 600 views, so that wasn't too bad.
Oh, but, fantastic.
That also helps that I run one of the largest Facebook podcast fan groups for the Pat McAfee Show 2.0. Any of you 11,000 maniacs watching, much love. Appreciate it. Feel free to share any of your stuff on there as well. I don't mind, as long as it's not over top. We had one guy who share like something 3-4 times a day. It's like, no, that's too much. Once or twice a week, you're fine. Other than that, no, not at all.
I'll be sure to share a very moving mini-series I've developed on the Library of Congress sorting and organizing system. Who doesn't appreciate a solid catalog?
Hey, in that group, enough vitamins might be had. They might enjoy it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Murder miniseries tend to be more of our focus. The Aaron Hernandez. Speaking of Patriots and Super Bowls, the Aaron Hernandez one that just came out. I guess I get why I don't get why they made it. Watching it, I don't feel like there was anything that anybody who had paid attention to the case hadn't heard. I guess maybe it's a way to get it out to people who hadn't paid attention. Because I feel like by the time he got arrested and then got to trial, it had kind of gotten back to just being sports fans only. And I think getting it on Netflix reminds you that, hey, the NFL once upon a time had a monster in its midst. Although
once.
I'm just saying, I think it's their way of reminding you. Although they definitely misspoke in the miniseries, because I can't remember who said it, but they made some comment about Aaron Hernandez being the first player to have committed double murder in the offseason and then played a whole season in the NFL. And I'm like, does anybody remember Ray Lewis at all?
I thought they said only player too.
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
Yeah, they did. It's like they forgot Ray Lewis existed. Two guys I would never go out to a nightclub with, by the way, Aaron Hernandez or Ray Lewis.
Well, it sounds like you'd be pretty safe as long as you are on their side.
Well, yeah, but if you accidentally spill a drink on them or something, bad things could happen. So there was a lot of rumor, a lot of talk about his personal private life that I don't think needed to be out there. I don't know if they were trying to garner sympathy or paint a more complete picture of him as a person and explaining how he got to where he got.
It's the dollar sign. Somebody somewhere got money for it. That's the only reason it came out.
100%. That made money. I mean, people watched it, but it's like he's still a monster. There are plenty of people who've had CTE. There's 112 brains had been tested. 111 were positive for CTE. He's the only one of those 111 that anybody that we know killed somebody. So it's like that doesn't excuse it. He's not the first NFL player to have had a single parent household, although his dad didn't die till he was in high school. So he actually had his dad around. Not the first guy in the NFL who had an asshole dad, Like, I get it. You're trying to mitigate to an extent his behavior, but like he still made very terrible decisions. Mm-hmm. And again, those are the three we know of. Are there more that nobody ever figured out?
Oh, sure.
Ray
yeah.
Ruth?
Well, Ray Ruth never played in the NFL ever again after he tried to killed his girlfriend at the time and almost killed his son. Who Ray Ruth is now out of jail, by the way, if people don't realize that.
You're kidding me.
No, because I was living in Charlotte at the time, and they were doing a ton of articles about him getting ready to get out and the grandmother who raised the son and whether they were going to even go see him when he got out and what that was going to be like. And I don't remember if he did end up going to be there the day his I don't know what I want to call him, because the man whose sperm created his life got out of prison. I think that's the appropriate word for somebody like Ray Caruth. And again, you hope maybe he learned from it and grew, and he's done almost 20 years in prison, so hopefully he's a better person coming out, because he lost everything. Wow. I mean, that's
been 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
You're old, Todd. We covered this. But,
wow, I didn't even think it was 20 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's been more than now. That was in the late 90s. We were still in high school when that happened.
Wow.
So yeah, been a while, been a minute. So yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, the NFL has had some despicable human beings in the NFL, but typically it's because they're just despicable human beings. I mean, again, Aaron Hernandez grew up in Bristol, Connecticut. He didn't grow up.
Like the most shady environment in the world. Yeah.
He didn't grow up in Brooklyn, the Bronx, or any of that back in the 90s or 80s or early 90s. He lived in suburbia in a 2-parent household for most of his life, with a brother who was an ideal role model for how to go to college, play athletics, and do whatever. And he got a $40 million contract.
Mm-hmm.
It was that Florida Gator team, I'm telling you. Didn't half of them end up in jail? I don't think I'm exaggerating that number.
And you had Tim Tebow as the ringleader. The most interesting group of humans ever put together, that's for sure. But again, that I think that would be the one thing you can kind of take away is that none of his teammates at Florida, none of in New England saw it, because when he was there, he was so professional. He was there on time. He was there. He studied. He helped lead the room. He was productive. He worked hard. Other than the Patriots buying him a trap house, didn't know about that, or renting him a trap apartment. That might have been a sign to the Patriots that something might not be right in this guy's life.
I was going to say, didn't sound like a lot of his teammates hung out with him either.
No, I mean,
he seemed like he was quite the lone wolf. Yeah.
And in all fairness, Bill Belichick had an inside information, and he was told not to draft him, because the worst thing that would happen to Aaron Hernandez is him to go back by home.
New England, yeah.
Urban told him flat out. He said it, and it was something I had heard before where Urban had said it, because I'm for a Notre Dame guy, I really am not a big Urban Meyer apologist, but you know, he did, you know, he's made it pretty clear that he told Bill Belichick and pretty much all those teams in that area of the country, if you bring him home, it will not be good for him. And it blew up in their face in the worst kind of way. But man, if I ever get married, I need to find someone like his wife. And I thought
it was a girlfriend. I don't think they were married.
Either way, you get the point. And somebody like his aunt. I need to be some of those ride or die people in my life.
Good body types, yeah.
Like, no, you know what? Yeah, I understand. I got breast cancer. This might kill me. Not telling you how that truck got there. Not a chance. Don't know. Just woke up. It was there. Don't know how else it got to my truck. Know anything about anything else? Nope. You gonna testify at all? Nope. You realize you're not gonna get your cancers? Don't care. All right. Did you take a gun safe out of the house? I mean, I took a box. What did you do with it? I threw it in a dumpster. Which one? I don't know.
There are a lot of stop and shops around here.
It's like, Jesus Christ. But that, at the end of the day, is probably the biggest thing I took away from that. I mean, I knew what his girlfriend had did by the time he got arrested, but understanding how much those two enabled him, you know, because even he went down to his grave blaming his mom for what he became, for his mom dating his uncle through marriage or whatever, you know, or his cousin's husband or whatever that other, I think it was his cousin, right? The surrogate mother that refused to, you know, testify. I think so, you know, when he, you know, within months of his dad dying, but like, to blame that again, you're just looking for excuses for what you did. Like that didn't turn you into a murderer. Plenty of people have been through crazy shit like that. I mean, typically they all live in Kentucky and dig coal for a living, but still.
If you're listening to Kentucky, no offense.
You know who you are. You guys keep voting for Mitch McConnell. I'm not apologizing to you.
Kentucky last in politics, first in chicken. I mean, our hearts.
I mean, I could talk football forever, but I think we're already closing at hour 15. I think the one thing I did want to get to before we wrap up this episode is Baseball Hall of Fame announcements. I
was waiting for it.
Well, wait, before you get to the announcement, what do you think about the Hall of Fame selling people's plaques as they're remodeling right now? They're selling they're doing a $30 million remodel, and they're selling some of the older plaques because they're going to have newer plaques put up there.
Oh, as long as they're replacing it, I don't.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
those things eventually do get old and decay. You know,
true.
So I can understand that. I mean, I get that they should. I mean, they're brass or copper or whatever, so they're going to last forever. But you know, you can get a nicer, newer one, more polished, a little better picture, whatever. I don't have a problem with that. Okay. I mean, I think the living family members of these players should have the first chance to buy them at a fixed cost. And it shouldn't be, you know, any more than the replacement value or less than the replacement value of them. But just in general, the Hall of Fame, obviously, I'm over the unanimous, not unanimous debate. So the fact that one person left Jeter off doesn't really faze me. You know, that for me, really the farce that showed it out to be what it was Greg Maddux. Once Greg Maddux wasn't unanimous, like, you guys are just a farce. I'm glad Mo Rivera was unanimous, because at the end of the day, there's something magical, and you know, in the light of today's baseball world of, you know, the Astros stealing signs, the Red Sox stealing signs, and to me, at the end of the day, there's nothing more hilarious than, by far and not even close, the greatest relief pitcher of all time having one pitch. He could have literally told you, "Hey, I'm throwing the cutter again." And you still couldn't do, you know, 99.9% of guys couldn't do anything with it. I mean, his numbers in the playoffs are ridiculous. I mean, more people have walked on the face of the moon than scored in the playoffs against Mo Rivera.
It just so happens that Luis Gonzalez and Tony Womack are partially responsible for that population.
Well, they showed everybody the playbook, though, too. Choke up. You don't have to hit home runs off this
Absolutely.
guy if you're going to hit him.
Wait.
Yeah, just put it in play.
What Luis Gonzalez was not called choking up. He was swinging with the knob of the bat. He was so far up out in that bat.
Hey, that's how far you can choke up if you want. But again, you know what's going to happen. He's throwing you the cutter. Like, again, can steal signs from him. Didn't matter.
Right.
I'm throwing one pitch and one pitch every time. Here it comes.
Well,
try and hit it. Now try and hit it again.
Could have literally been the end of Major League 2, where he's just like, I'm not even giving you signs. Here we go.
You know what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say he said his was Maddox, mine was Junior. When he did not get in unanimously, I was like, "That's it."
Oh, sure.
Nobody at this point, nobody should, because if Junior didn't get in unanimously, who should then?
Well, I think what happened with Junior, unfortunately, is people always remember the most recent performance, whether it's
falling
right
asleep
or
in the
not.
dugout and-
Just the old broken down Junior instead of him clearly being the best position player in baseball at the time. He got caught up with the steroid era because he wasn't on steroids, because he broke down like an older player should.
Right.
And people
Correct.
forgot, hey, wait, this is what the end of your mid and end of your 30s should look like as a ball player. You shouldn't suddenly put on 40 pounds of muscle mass, your head go 3 hat sizes, and you start hitting 70 home runs a year when you could never hit, you'd barely broke 40 before.
Are you trying? You make that more general, please, because you really making it sound like you're targeting one person there.
You could pick
or
any,
Sammy have
Sosa,
a hitting
Mark
coach
McGwire,
job for the
Barry
Florida
Bonds.
Marlins, or I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, granted, yes.
I thought we were playing Who Am I? No.
I mean, I think we've covered, and the worst part is with Bonds, it was all ego. Like he was, he was a Hall of Famer before he ever touched the steroids.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But his ego would not let him get passed up by McGwire and Sosa while they were on steroids. It's like, guess what? If you could have lived with it, you'd be in the Hall of Fame like Ken Griffey Jr., but you couldn't. And I hope to God that you and Roger Cummins never get in. Because you both, and here's the thing. Growing up, I was born 1981. I got to experience the Bash Brothers in all of their glory. And the way Jose Canseco was treated at the end of his career and the way he was treated after he wrote Juiced was abysmal by the sport of baseball. And all these people, oh, he's lying, he's not talking truth. Nobody from baseball has ever said, hey, we're sorry about the way we treated you. We're sorry that we called you a liar when you turned out to be absolutely right in every single one of these cases. Our bad. So the way he was treated to me has tuned me off to those guys. If anybody out of that group deserves to get in, it's Jose Canseco.
I think you've highlighted a very serious flaw in baseball culture, and that's that the media controls almost everything. So if you're not a media darling, you can kiss a unanimous vote goodbye. You pretty much can kiss consideration beyond your first eligibility stretch goodbye. It's a sad reality, but as a baseball fan, I'll speak for myself, I would love to take a more discerning look at voting eligibility and who those parties should be. I think the media should be a much smaller proportion of voting eligible members for the Hall.
Well,
because a lot of that. Sorry, go ahead.
And as I say, we've also learned that we can't trust former players either. All you have to look is the Veterans Committee, some of the people they've let in, not to name names of Yinzer legends, but Phil Yastrzemski absolutely had an amazing moment, but not a Hall of Famer by any stretch of the imagination. And then when you add that he got in and it took Ron Santo as long as he did, was abysmal given the time. And again, you have to look at Hall of Fames for what they are. They are museums that tell the history of the game.
Oh, sure.
And you should
highly contributors. Yeah.
To me, you have to look at, can you tell the history of the sport without this person? And a lot of times, a lot of people who get in, you probably could, to be honest. They get in and it's like, I'm going to use Larry Walker for an example.
Oh, sure.
I could 100% tell the history of the game without Larry Walker. And the perfect counterpoint to Larry Walker is Don Mattingly not being in. Their stats are almost identical. Their careers are almost identical. And Larry Walker played half of his career in Coors Field at the time when I could have walked up and hit a home run in Coors Field.
Well,
So-
that's an interesting comparison. I would argue that Walker was respectively better at his position than Mattingly was. I mean,
I think people
I go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think people forget how good of a defensive first baseman Don Mattingly was.
Oh, no. I mean, well, you also remember the timing conversation we had? Don Mattingly's contemporary across the boroughs was Keith Hernandez.
Right. But I would
Who
say
isn't in either.
right. But I would say that Don Mattingly had a more consistent long-ranging career, including an MVP. Granted, I think Larry Walker ended up with one.
He did, yeah, 96, I believe.
But,
96, 97.
again, that was in Colorado. To me, that's and in that era of Colorado when there were no humidors or any attempts to keep the ball in the park, and it to me that is what it is.
But you have to look at the stats as they are. The guy was actually better on the road than he was at Coors.
He was, but
so he actively with the bat was debunking this idea that he could only hit, in Denver.
But I think
now Vinny Castillo was a different story. But
I think you also have to look that Walker's numbers were, when you look at his career home and road splits. I mean, I'd have to get into Baseball Reference and look at that time frame, because when he was playing in Montreal, obviously, typically in Montreal, it was easier to hit on the road than in the Dome.
Oh, absolutely, that place was a cavern. Yeah, I
mean, I've been there. It was an abysmal place to watch a baseball game.
You were one of the 100 people that was in the stadium.
Yeah, I was definitely one of dozens and dozens in attendance. But the crowning achievement was getting flipped off by Chipper Jones. So.
Well, wait a minute.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Because again,
he wouldn't stop calling him Larry.
There was me and two other guys in the left field. Larry, and the catcher could hear us because it was that empty.
And from his point of view, after 7 innings of that, I actually do believe the Braves took pity on him and took him out of the game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he did, and that's when we left because at that point the game was done. Anyways, the Braves were up a bunch, and it was.
So let me ask you this: in the time frame Larry Walker played, so we'll use the 7-8 year split model, right? Was there, say, Barry Bonds, who at the time was splitting between left or right depending on what they needed in San Francisco and Pittsburgh? Was there a position player that had comparable or better numbers on both sides of the field?
So we're talking late 90s.
Like 95 to 2002. We can use that as a healthy split.
Well, you're right fielder in Chicago. I mean, he was steroided up, but he had the numbers better in him.
I think it's hard to use guys who were.
It's the same era.
Sammy Sosa was definitely not the fielder Larry. He was not the defensive player Larry Walker was.
Yeah, at the beginning he was. As he started getting bigger and bigger.
Sure.
Yeah, but at the beginning he had
that ended at like 96, 97. I mean, as soon as he started hitting dingers, man, that was it. Say goodbye to defense.
But he still had the cannon for the arm. He still had the arm.
Oh, sure, but that's not going to minimize how abysmal he was. I mean, literally, he's the reason you put your worst defensive player in right field. At that point. I mean, Larry actually made it a viable position again.
As I say, baseball, in pro baseball, your worst defensive defender should go into left field.
But I mean, you have the highest percentage of pull, right?
Yeah. Well, to an extent, but you could also have the shortest throws to third and home from left. That's typically
very true.
I mean, typically, if you look at modern baseball construction, say going back to the mid 80s, left field has been the worst defender. Right field has typically been the better. Look at guys like Vladimir Guerrero, for example, of a guy in that era who was vastly superior to Larry Walker.
Vastly, I mean, by ability, yes. By numbers, no.
Yeah, I get, but again, I think when you come down,
Vladimir had time. He stuck around forever. I mean, Vlad basically played till his legs came out.
Right. But I think part of the Hall of Fame discussion has to be those one shining moments for an example. There's something to be said for consistency in producing over a decade, but there's something when you can go back and watch those almost Javi Baez hitting balls off the dirt and up at your shoulders and everywhere around the strike zone, but in the strike zone sometimes. And then the plays he made out in the outfield were ridiculous.
Sure.
So let me ask this.
I mean, obviously Griffey was easily vastly superior to anything Larry Walker did.
But he was a pure center fielder.
Right.
I'm just having to run through my head of who was even those guys at the time. So it's
you had Moises Alou. I mean,
Moises Alou was definitely a step below Larry Walker. I mean, I'd say
Moises is probably the best tier 2 outfielder at the time for sure. I mean, he was great. Moises was fantastic. He just wasn't. he definitely lacked the power capability that Larry had. But I would say defensively, he was maybe one step behind him. He was a fantastic defensive outfielder. The guy could hit for contact. I mean, almost bar none.
I mean, I would have to say you have to look at outfielders as a whole group. The Hall of Fame does not look at outfielders as center, right, left. They look at them as outfielders. Historically, that's kind of been the way they voted. They don't look at them.
You're looking right and left, right? Manny Ramirez.
Manny being Manny.
And Manny had a way better bat than Larry.
Yeah, but once again, Manny
worse
still.
defender.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Oh yeah. I'm not gonna give him. I'm not gonna give him defensively, but
he was so superior with the bat. And I know Manny got caught up with steroids at the end, but I think you could look at him as a guy through most of his career who didn't. You know.
Sure.
I think bad decisions were made, but I think, even
he got older, wanted to stay relevant. That's all it was. Yeah, like most.
But coming up in his career, he's such a pure hitter. I think it's hard to overlook somebody like that.
So once again, this points back to opportunities. Manny spent his early years in Cleveland, and he was hitting and practicing with Albert Bell.
Yeah.
So if you don't think he learned some things, and it really, I would argue that kind of stuff linked to his career. I mean, Albert Bell. I mean, let's be real. Pound for pound was probably the scariest hitter in the last generation. When his body was healthy, that guy.
I'd be there. But
we can talk about the juiced up guys, but I'm talking pure natural ability at the plate.
You got to go with my guy Bo.
Jackson?
Bo's window.
I always loved Bo.
Bo's window was so short, and he was not a contact guy.
It was short, but
I mean, he wasn't Rob Deere.
He did it to himself, though. He stretched himself thin.
He wasn't Rob Deere with a bat by any stretch of the imagination.
Rob Deere,
but see, like you have guys like Adam Dunn that are interesting cases when you look at Larry Walker. What do you do with an Adam Dunn now? He wasn't the contact hitter, but his power numbers were there. Defensively, he was good in the outfield, not so good in the infield. I don't know why they ever tried playing him in the infield. Then towards the end,
it was a terrible idea.
And then at the end of his career, he was terrible in the outfield too. But by then, it was the end of his career.
Well, let me ask this.
I mean, I'd have to go team by team and think. You had Bernie, obviously.
Sure.
Paul O'Neill, I would put right there with Larry Walker.
Sure.
So,
okay. And Paul had a cannon.
Do I get to give a shout out to my man Bobby Bonilla because he's still making more money than any of these guys?
Hey, he may not have been the best outfielder, but he was the smartest. Thanks, Fred Wilpon.
God, that's my favorite day of the year. By the way, Bobby Bonilla Day, favorite day of the year.
That's insane to me. Just these. Well, anyway, happy Bobby Bonilla Day. It's not too far away.
July the 1st. It's coming soon enough.
Yeah.
For many, many more years.
Yeah,
Was it 34?
Sorry,
2034?
You know what? Speaking of Mets fans, Carlos Beltran, when he was in his prime, was filthy.
Absolutely, but even Carlos was a little bit behind the Walker window.
2000-ish was when he first started, because he was there in Houston for the Roger Clemens thing, and he was
the first World Series run and all that, right?
Yeah, so I mean,
was that 2005?
Yeah, so he was there at the end of Walker's run. Starts his.
Actually, didn't they play each other in the CS?
I mean,
year in 2005.
That gets you to that overlapping eras,
Right. Well, I mean, here's the thing: we discussed Larry Walker. Does that make a case for Lance Berkman? Very similar profile there.
Yeah, and I don't view Lance. See, I didn't view Larry Walker as a Hall of Famer. I definitely don't view Lance Berkman as one.
Well, what caused Larry Walker to jump up 24 percentage points this year compared to
because it was Derek Jeter and nobody else on the ballot.
Okay. Right. There was no one that really stood out in the ballot.
So you can vote for up to 15 guys when there's nobody. Some of these guys do go through their full 15 and use them all. Some guys will pick only Hall of Famers, and then there's some guys who refuse to vote for anybody on the first ballot, other than Mo Rivera. Apparently, I thought maybe we'd gotten over that, but apparently, Derek Jeter slept with one writer's favorite girl sometime.
No, it was a writer in Miami. I'm telling you, it had to be a writer in Miami, and he's being penalized for what he's doing to that team down there.
I don't think there's any writers in Miami sports scene that have enough longevity to have a Hall of Fame ballot.
Lebertard has
a vote. Voted for Nick Swisher. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea who he voted for.
Well, Lebertard has a vote.
There's no way Lebertard has. There's no way. No, he has to do a theoretical. Lebertard was never a baseball writer. And trust me when I tell you this, the baseball writers committee is that selective. You have to focus on baseball at some point.
Well, he makes the joke every year. He has one, and he votes.
I think he's joking.
Oh, okay.
I think it's Levitard being Levitard. There's no
I'd
way.
rather have Levitard's dad have a vote than him.
Oh, God. Not Poppy.
Poppy.
Baseball is fun, just writing, just checking whatever boxes come to his mind,
So you kind of, to me, it's the same problem you ran into when you let Yastrzemski, and you start to open this Pandora's box. And right after Yastrzemski, that's when they changed the Veterans Committee. And getting back to my point with Santo getting in after Yastrzemski and having to take a third iteration of the Veterans Committee to get in, here was a guy who played. He was one of the first guys to openly play baseball at that level with type 1 diabetes. And, when you look at his numbers, the only reason he didn't get in legitimately is because the writers said we can't have that many Cubs in off a team that never won a World Series. That's literally what it came down to for Santo, for most writers, why he didn't get in when he was actively on the writers' ballot. And that's goes back to where you started and where I started, is that having just the writers' vote is flawed. Having just the players' vote is flawed. That we have to but what's the answer? 50-50? 60-40? Because at the end of the day, really the Hall of Fame is the Baseball Writers Hall of Fame.
I want to vote too.
That is true.
But I mean,
I should get a vote too.
I'd like to see a 50-25-25.
I don't like a fan vote at all. Owners?
Oh, no fan vote. No fan vote.
Yeah.
Hall of Fame members.
Okay. So Hall of Fame members, current.
Yeah, and then I would say
probably current players, not retired players, because you're gonna have too many people looking at their contemporaries, and then
correct.
I would not be upset with that. I think current players would be in tune. Although, then that gets into some of the issue you run with now, even as you get younger baseball writers starting to get some Hall of Fame votes that look back at older players who played, when the game was counting stats as opposed to sabermetrics now, and they try to put a sabermetric eye on it. It's like, it's kind of hard to look backwards, and it's nothing against it. I have this.
Sabermetric skews the timeless nature of the game, right?
Well, my thing is, I was a very early Bill James guy. I used to read his abstract every year. Big fan of numbers, but the OPS plus number that so many people hang on to for comparison errors is an inherently super flawed number. Slugging percentage in baseball is a super flawed number. A double does not make you 2 times more likely to score than a single. A triple does not make you 3 times more likely to score as a single. And a walk is not the same as a hit in terms of scoring opportunities. It is close. It is not. So OPS plus, which has become a standard for a lot
driving force,
for these sabermetric guys to say, when you're comparing generations, the problem is, to me, there is value in guys that is lost, like Derek Jeter, who hit 300 not just in the regular season but the playoffs, because putting the ball in play and making contact does, even through outs, increase your chance to score over strikeouts and walks.
Can somebody clip that last 3 minutes and send it to Theo?
We'll work on that.
If he hasn't heard it all the other times I've said it, I don't think he's about to hear it now. Because that's the biggest misconception, is so many people became fans of sabermetrics because of Moneyball the book, Moneyball the movie, and the attention it got in the press. And what was misinterpreted from that entire thing is not that on-base percentage is a better indicator than batting average of scoring a run. I mean, it is to an extent, but weighted on-base average is a much better number yet, because it properly weighs out a single, a double, a triple, a home run, and a walk into the equation for saying, here's what you're weighted on, what likelihood of scoring a run would be based on the outcome of your at-bat, and it doesn't double, make a double 200, 2,000, a triple 3,000. It doesn't skew the numbers as bad. And I won't get lost in the sabermetric numbers of it, but weighted on base, what the movie was about and what the book was about was identifying an undervalued skill in the marketplace. At the time, on base percentage was an undervalued skill set in the free agent marketplace. It was an undervalued skill in the draft marketplace. College hitters were an undervalued proposition in the draft marketplace. Since all of this information has come out and since people have embraced sabermetrics, in my opinion, now those two things are overvalued. Because people started to value college hitters because they were more likely to be productive, professional baseball players than anybody else drafted in the first round. That's great. That is true. But some of your highest ceiling players have still been high school hitters. People want to point to the pitchers found in the 30th and 40th rounds and say you can find a starting pitcher anywhere. That is not true. 50% plus of every major league rotation was drafted in the first round of the baseball draft. If you are going to find a frontline starter, it has to come in the first round. You don't find these over slot guys in the second and third round. Most of the time, those guys end up being overinflated price tags and misbelievers of hype. Because at the end of the day, guys who are going to be great starters have skills that are so identifiable that they're taken early and often. They're not guys who last around. They're guys that teams are more than willing to pay for. So to me, that is still probably the most undervalued thing is starting pitchers in the baseball draft. But to me, batting average may be the most undervalued stat in baseball right now. And it's crazy to think about because, at the end of the day, we all know RBIs are meaningless. There's no going back on that one. It's about as meaningless a stat as a save is. And nothing against I can't think of the closer in San Diego that's trying to make a case to get into the Hall of Fame right now.
Hoffman?
Yeah.
Trevor Hoffman.
Trevor Hoffman.
Like, there's a reason why Rivera got it unanimously. It wasn't the saves. He was flat out the best reliever in the game of baseball for essentially his entire career. Other than for the little bit where they tried to make him a starter. I don't know who thought a one-pitch starter was a good idea. Although, granted, he had like 3 pitches then. And that's always been the case against relievers in the Hall of Fame in the first place, is if they were really good enough, they'd be starters. Just Rivera was so valuable as a reliever that he changed that equation. I'm not sure that guys like Hoffman or Billy Koch or any of these guys that will come up in that discussion later on, Bill Wagner, will have that same kind of value. And I think the war will show that, but I also think just the eyeball test tells you that these guys weren't going out for 2 and 3 inning saves in high leverage situations and, clinching the pennant situations, clinching division situations, things, that Rivera did routinely.
Well, it's really interesting. You brought up winning relievers versus multiple inning relievers, right? And I don't know if you recall, this a few years ago, I actually wrote an op-ed on behalf of Lee Smith getting a favorable induction. It's always an interesting concept because in order to save games, the premise is that you have to be in position to save them, right? So it basically means that you have to be basically in a favorable position going into the late 8th or 9th inning. And so it's a really slippery slope from my perspective when discussing closing pitchers, because teams that, first of all, let me just say a statistical anomaly that Trevor Hoffman has as many saves as he does, the fact that he's been around forever. But you literally have to be in position to win games to save them. So it's always odd when people talk about closers. For example, Billy Wagner's been in recent discussions, right? I think his writers' candidacy just closed, if I recall.
Yeah, I think
this
was 15. Yeah, I think if not, it's really close.
Yeah, I believe it was year 5. Yeah, I believe you're. No, actually, that was longer. You're actually right. It's the end of his full window. So in that case, given his peers, I mean, effectively, Billy Wagner, once again, given the best, we'll say 8 years of his career, was literally the second best closer in baseball. Save Mo.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that is absolutely the case to make. I just think the baseball writers have looked very unfavorably on relievers unless you were just that next level kind of guy. And I think Lee Smith was one of those cases where he was just a different guy. Dennis Eckersley was a different guy. Mo Rivera was a different guy. I think
Wagner, Bruce Sutter was not that guy, but Bruce Sutter had enough credibility as a starter that when he transitioned into the closing role, that he already had favorable.
John Smoltz, that guy.
Correct.
Good enough as a starter, good enough as a reliever. And when you put it all together, that's a Hall of Fame career. I think Wagner just was so not as a starter And again, Rivera wasn't bad as a starter. It was just he was such a weapon.
He was more effective, as a closer. Absolutely.
And I think Wagner would have been an interesting case. I think he kind of shows, again, what Baseball Hall of Fame thinks of relievers, and it'll be really interesting going forward with now some of these 4 and 5 inning starters. Or in the case of Tampa Bay last year and a few other teams I see starting these things, these 1 inning starters, where essentially you take your second best reliever, pitch the first 3 batters, and now you set your starter up, to go innings 2 to 3, 2 to 6, or 2 to 7. You hope, hopefully 2 to 7 with facing the lineup only twice, because ultimately that's what that's all about. Is the numbers show if you face a pitcher faces the lineup a third time, that the lineup gets the better of them. Well. Yeah, obviously, usually if you've seen him a third time, then you've seen everything he has to have. But
correct.
Well, also, he's getting tired. I mean, he's also throwing 80, 90 pitches at that point normally.
Oh, don't even get me started on 80 or 90 pitches when you got some of the, go back in the day and watch these guys throw 200 pitches. I mean, Nolan Ryan is somewhere just laughing at you with that 80, 90 pitches thing.
That's a different conversation of babying everybody, but
there was probably 3 innings during one of his no hitters that he threw 90 pitches.
Guy threw a ton of pitches.
That man could go through pitches like nobody's business. Again, ultimately, he's the very case of what the Hall of Fame should be. You can't tell the history of baseball without telling the story of Nolan Ryan. 7 no hitters or not, just his longevity, his strikeouts, the way he pitched, to me was enough for him to be in.
I just have a picture of him just like Babe Ruth, sitting there smoking a cigar, eating a sandwich during his no-hitter, maybe even drinking a beer.
Popping some Advil.
Then you have Doc Ellis just tripping out, going on a magic carpet right in the middle of his.
Now, I think there is sometimes in the immortal words of Liberty Valance, when the myth becomes the legend, you print the legend. I think that's the case of that. I think he may have been at the end of a trip or, had tripped the day before and turned it into, because I'm not saying that it's pretty hard to throw, a no-hitter, but it's really hard to throw a no-hitter when you're seeing dragons in the backstop.
Just dragons in the backstop. I don't think I'll ever unhear that again. Well, of course, none of us were there to really validate or refute it. Yeah. But those are the stories. That's the lore that undergirds what you're talking about, being able to tell the story, right? The narrative. What is baseball? What does it mean? And I'm always drawn back to this idea that baseball, of all the major sports, is the most timeless of the 4, right? You're not bound by time. There's no shot clock. You don't have quarters. You simply just have innings, and when it ends, it ends. And there's this strange tension between pitches where there is a whole inner system taking place, right? Communication, signals. I mean, if you're using Astros, camera recording, but
drum sets in the dugout.
The buzzer too.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the buzzer, but you could definitely hear them pounding on things in the dugout and whistles during those games. That's for sure. That is the beauty of baseball, is you cannot run out the clock. You can't just stop playing. Essentially, you can't get into victory formation and take 3 knees. You can't dribble out by the half court line. You have to give the other team their chance to come back. You have no option. And
compared to the other 3, the 3 pure majors, there's a tension to baseball that is purely its own.
And I think that may be the thing the Baseball Hall of Fame gets the most right, is that it has so many exhibits of events and one-offs, and so you don't have to be a Hall of Fame player. See Kerry Wood to have a presence in the Hall of Fame. His 20K game, the highest game scored game, greatest game pitched in the history of baseball. Amazingly enough, to most people who don't understand that sometimes a non-perfect game is a greater game than a perfect game.
Absolutely.
Is immortalized in the Hall of Fame, and he had, so if he ever wants to take his kids or his grandkids more aptly, because his kids were at least old enough to see the end of his career, sadly, the way that ended. We'll talk about one of baseball's greatest what ifs. Oh, One of the greatest.
Dusty Baker.
There was just something with his body altogether. I mean, he popped his Tommy John, his ulnar ligament before he ever crossed paths with Dusty Baker. Mark Pryor, you might be able to blame on Dusty Baker, but sometimes you wonder if some of those guys are that mechanical. Sometimes it creates a different kind of tension.
I always thought he got hurt running the bases.
But I think baseball creates that amazing. Their Hall of Fame creates those moments. The All-American Professional Girls Baseball League having its own exhibit. These not just permanent exhibits that they do have, but they're also rotating ones that tell stories that may not have risen to a full Hall of Fame career for somebody or some group, but tells you the whole story of the game. I think if you've never been to Cooperstown and never been to the museum, and it's been a long time since I've been there, but one of the things I loved is, it was just still a tiny little town on a highway in the middle of nowhere, New York.
Yes.
So you felt like you were stepping back in time when you stepped there. And there's just a reverence for that museum. It doesn't have all the new, again, it's been 15 plus years, but it doesn't have all the new digital stuff. And, you go in and it's quiet and there's plaques, but it's not just about the people in the Hall of Fame. It's about the moments in the Hall of Fame. You get to see old scorecards, old parts of stadiums, and it tells you the history of the sport, not just the people in the sport, but some of the key moments. So, I think it's probably what it does better than any Hall of Fame. But getting back to Larry Walker.
Yeah.
I don't.
Damn you, Larry Walker, you took us down the road.
Those sideburns, man, it's hard to forget.
I think there does need to be some better selection criteria. I don't, once people are in, you can't take them out, obviously. So what I love about sports the most, though, is you could talk about it forever and have your own opinion, and you're never wrong because of sports. It's not like it's life or death most of the time,
Right.
It's just fun and it's a distraction. And there's billions of dollars being made off of kids' games. But yeah, I could see a 50-25. So 50% to writers, 25 to current players, 25 to Hall of Famers. Because I think if you go to contemporary players who aren't Hall of Famers, that are retired, then they could be skewed. Although sometimes if you go with
selection bias,
current players may not know the old players enough. I do.
Well, the contemporary, hey, you vote for me, I'll vote for you then.
Right. It's iffy, but there's no perfect system ever.
Right.
I mean, Albert Bell is not in the Hall of Fame strictly because sports writers hated him. The baseball writers hated him. Like, to me, yeah, his career got cut short by injury and then impacted by injury, but if you, again, using that window stretch, there's nobody who impacted the, I mean, I don't know. I guess you had guys like Gary Sheffield and Junior and Bonds. That's where it gets hard for me with Larry Walker. There's so many guys that if given more time to think about it, you can come up with them.
Oh, sure. But, I'll argue. So I'll argue for and against Chef. For Chef, definitely figured it out early in his career in Milwaukee and then created a very productive career on all fronts for quite a long time. I mean, I would say his prime was a solid 10, 12 years, which is much longer than the average major leaguer, and has carved out a nice niche for himself. I actually think the con is his longevity. He stuck around too long. He wanted a specific number, and he stuck around until he got it.
I mean, and right. And I think a ton of players have had those,
Oh, absolutely.
Chasing those numbers or chasing one last milestone, but I mean, if I'm picking between David Justice and Larry Walker in their prime, I'm taking David Justice.
Well, I mean,
but Justice had a much shorter prime.
It's also harder to pass up some of the money they were tossing at those PLAs too. I mean,
I would say Justice was probably close to 7 years, 7, 8.
I'd argue 5.
I mean, I could see where you could say his absolute peak was 5, but yeah, I mean,
he was still a productive player at any rate.
Yeah.
But pound for pound, who could get it done and on both sides of the plate and be a guarantee? I would say guarantee. Guarantee is a very binding word, but a more likely contributor. I still got to side with Larry on that one. And DJ's my guy. I mean, I was a big fan. But I still think Larry gets the edge there.
Kenny Lofton for sure. I'm taking over Larry Walker.
Kenny Lofton was absolutely filthy. I mean, for what his skill set was,
right?
Different
skill set,
absolutely valuable.
But,
absolutely valuable.
God, that Cleveland outfield there for a while. Who was the third outfielder with him? Or there was a stretch where it was Bell, Lofton, and Manny,
and
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Manny was out there for a while. DJ was there for a couple of years.
Cleveland teams in the mid to late 90s were filthy.
That 95 and 96 team was absolutely disgusting. Like, it was the best team in baseball.
They were out there to the Braves. I mean, that was...
Well, that, and then in 97, they lost to the Marlins.
Correct, and that was kind of the beginning of the end.
Poor mistake.
Until the new era.
Why the mistake by the lake is the mistake by the lake. Even when things are good, they can't be good enough.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that lineup, that 3-4 year stretch, that is a scary lineup. And they were really good at baseball.
I mean, by then Harold Baines was a DH.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think.
I mean, you had Eddie Murray that was there for a few years, and the Alomar brothers.
Yeah,
and they had a pretty.
Yeah, that was a pretty good
team.
That team didn't win a World Series is amazing to me. Young Jarrett Wright was filthy as a starter then. Started Game 7 of that World Series.
Good old Fat Bart was Skinny Bart back then.
Hey, he's a hero to us all still. Fat
Bart is the hero baseball didn't realize it needed.
But now that is an interesting Hall of Fame discussion. Bartolo Colon.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I mean, he's not going to get in. There's no way he can get in. His numbers just aren't there. But again, he was such a presence in baseball for so long and such a guy. CeCe Sabathia will be another interesting. Like, pitchers in general will get very interesting going forward because the numbers have changed so much.
Yeah.
And the way you have to look at those numbers for starters. I could talk Hall of Fame stuff, and I could talk all of this with you forever. But we're closing in on 2 hours here.
Oh, goodness. Oh, I do want to make one disclaimer and apology. I said right field. I meant left field. I got my words mixed up, and I do apologize for that.
I mean, I don't think anybody's holding us accountable. Please don't, because we ain't fact checking nothing here either.
If we have any comments, we'll let you know.
we don't have our Tony Reale here to fact check us at the end of the episode. So
I can make a completely outlandish claim right now. Jay Buhner's a Kentucky Colonel. I don't know. I was just trying to go out there and see what I had. But well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking sports with you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure, man.
No
it's been great meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
Friend, by the way.
All right,
Absolutely.
man. Great talking to you.
You too. Take care now, guys.
Bye. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week to the Off Base Sports Podcast. Again, call in, be part of the conversation. You may be on for an hour plus. Sometimes it helps when it's an old friend that you've known for years and can talk sports with. And conversations that you've had before on Hall of Fame ideas. But as always, subscribe, rate, review. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Google Podcasts, just about anywhere. This video will be on our Facebook page for Off Base Sports Podcast. Give it a like. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and the Action Network app to track all my sports gambling at Degenerate Jason with no O. So Degenerate, JASN. Give us a like, share a page, subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.
Bye. Okay. That was